My name is Gilbert Donahue, nickname is Gil, and I am a graduate of the School of International Service in 1968, so this is my 50th anniversary reunion. And I am a native of Arlington, Virginia and Howard County, Maryland. I've lived in both places. And so I was really local when I came here. And I was telling somebody at lunch that one reason I did want to study international relations, so that's what really drew me to American U. I was telling one person at lunch that I had chosen American University instead of Georgetown, because in those days Georgetown undergraduate was male only, and the campus was surrounded by a metal fence, fairly high metal fence with gates, and the freshmen had to be inside that fence perimeter by 8 p.m. on weeknights. And because at home I had no curfew, I was not interested in that. I wanted more freedom than that involved. So that was one of the reasons really that drew me to AU. Also, I thought the School of International Service curriculum was more modern, more forward-looking. The word we would use now is interdisciplinary. I'm not sure they used that word back then. But it was not so specific to international relations. It really related to a lot of other fields, and I thought that would be more valuable.
How did you decide to stay local to DC?
I had, of course, originally looked at a typical classical four-year liberal arts college, and felt that I wanted to really, rather than dabble here and there in various subjects, my main interest was international relations. So I was looking for something with an IR focus. And there weren't so many schools to choose from back then. Of those besides AU and Georgetown, those that were in existence were more at the graduate level, not the undergraduate level.
Is there anything about your experience at AU, a story that you'd want to share, or anything in particular?
Yeah. In fact, one of the comments I made to some people at my table at lunch, our keynote speaker was this well-known professor who talked about the Beatles as embodying that, or being the center of attention for the period 1964 to 68 when my class was here at AU. And yes, of course, they were very important, not only within the U.S., but of course internationally. However, my strong recollection of the cultural influences we had more to do with terms that young people may not even be familiar with anymore. I don't know if you're familiar with the term hootenanny. Okay. When we were at AU, it was the period in music that I would call the folk music era. And so it was also, in some parts of the country, the place for sit-ins and demonstrations and so forth. A lot of times we here, we're very constrained by the weather. This is not Southern California where you can just go outside and be comfortable in January, right? So, but we enjoyed very much the sessions to get together to sing folk songs and learn about activism, I would say, in that context. And then, in particular, the year 1968, when we graduated, was actually a very traumatic year for my class. I hope a unique one, because I hope no other class has to deal with what we were dealing with. We were, of course, in the throes of the Vietnam War, and all of the guys pretty much were staring at very stark possibilities. I know I had been told by my draft board that although I had a student deferment as an undergraduate, I would not get one as a graduate student. So I didn't bother applying for graduate school. So in my case, I applied for Peace Corps. Just thinking, well, let's see if I'm accepted. If I'm accepted, let's see if I would get a deferment, etc. And I was very fortunate. I was accepted to Peace Corps, and in Peace Corps, I sought a deferment from my draft board, and my draft board gave it to me. apparently I learned after the fact that I was the first person within my draft board who had applied for a deferment for Peace Corps. And so they said, why not? This is, we know this guy, he is worth it. But it was a period when 80%, 70% of the guys expected to be drafted, expected to go to Vietnam, and probably only 10, 15% thought that was a good idea. So it was a very stark choice. And so there were groups around campus to advise guys on becoming a conscientious objector, for example, because you had to go through this long process and you had to really be coached. And there were some people who were talking about leaving the country, going to Canada. I mean, it was really that stark. Then the other things that happened that year, just prior to our spring break, which was, of course, already on the calendar, Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. was assassinated. Washington, downtown Washington, was burned. Blocks and blocks and blocks were burned. And so we had several different problems, again, unique ones. I had a car at the time, and some of my friends were asking me to get them to the airport so they could go home early. And we couldn't drive the typical way through Washington. I had to drive into Virginia and down the George Washington Parkway to get to National Airport. I mean, those were the issues that we were dealing with. Many of us had been involved with African American communities in Washington and wanted to help them. And many times they said, we don't want you, your white face is going to make it difficult for us. We know you support us, but not now. So it was a very stark period. And then I think just about the time we graduated, Robert Kennedy was assassinated. So we were dealing with a lot. The summer after we graduated was Kent State. I don't know if you're familiar with what happened there. And the Democratic convention that summer in Chicago was extremely traumatic and bloody, actually. So we were dealing with a lot that year.
What was it like to be a young person? Like, what were the emotions? How did that feel to be witness to all of that?
We knew we were a different generation. And we actually had been highlighted by Time magazine. They did a big cover on the class of '68. So they also recognized our generation was very special. But we knew we were different because we had very different views from some of our parents. And we were very into some movements where I would say at the early stage of movements which had become more mainstream. So welcoming diversity, welcoming the involvement of women. It was sort of we didn't use the word feminism, but pre-feminism. But certainly our idea of diversity encompassed women. And here on the campus, and another reason that AU was very attractive, it already had many foreign students. And I would say a good quarter of the friends that I had at International Service School were from outside the U.S. And it added so much because it was cultural experience beyond the classroom. You could have a meal with them, you could talk with them about what life was like in their country, and it was beyond the textbook.
How did that affect your life moving forward? Like, how did that experience at AU change your life?
I think many of us at the time were definitely looking to do something outside the U.S. In my case, I traveled in Europe during the summer between my junior and senior years. And then in my senior year, applied for the Peace Corps, went into training, and then went to a country in South Asia known as Nepal. So that's quite far and quite distant and quite different culturally. I know many of my friends were already interested in having a junior semester or junior year abroad academically, or doing graduate work abroad. And I think that, again, American University was at the forefront of that. It was not such a common experience for most college students at that time.
Is there anything else you'd like to share about AU or about your life and how AU affected you?
Well, I am fortunate and perhaps among the few in my class who actually had a career in the Foreign Service. And so AU prepared me very well for that. And I thought at the time the curriculum of SIS was especially well done. As I commented to one of the people at lunch, I said I remember 3 classes in 3 different departments that dealt with the similar material, but coming at it from different directions, and it reinforced. And so I don't remember the specific names of the classes, but the materials were related to philosophers. So Locke, Hobbes, Rousseau, people like that, and some more recent. But one class would have been in a philosophy class, another class would have been perhaps international relations or foreign policy, another class was economics. And you got those same thinkers from different angles, which I think was extremely valuable and probably a little bit unusual at AU. I mean, I think that most universities would cover those people in one or another department, but you wouldn't get them so many different ways.
And just out of interest and context, what was your career path after AU?
Right. Okay, I went into the Peace Corps in Nepal for 2 years, and while I was there, took the Foreign Service exam in our embassy in Kathmandu, passed it, and then when I returned to the United States, had my oral interview and was asked to enter the State Department, which I did within a couple of months. And then I had a career that included Mexico, Ivory Coast, West Africa, and then a long career in East Asia. So included Chinese language training and postings in Taiwan, Hong Kong, and mainland China. And then my last overseas post was in Brazil, so went back to Latin America. And then I retired from the Foreign Service and worked for a number of defense contractors that had contracts with the Department of Defense, State, and Commerce. And the programs that I managed were international ones. So my international experience, of course, was extremely valuable.
Thank you so much for sharing.
Thank you.